Hello everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In the last video, we had Elizabeth and her family going through the tragedies of war and how Elizabeth and her brother David try to live a normal life of that of a teenager through the chaos of war. I'm anxious to find out what happens next, so let's see what we can find out today. After the fire, the next few weeks were spent cleaning, clearing, and repairing the castle after the fire and water damage. Elizabeth spent a lot of time with the soldiers. One day she took 3 soldiers for a drive in the pony carriage, and she played frequent card games. One favorite was Hearts, which is a new game. And after breakfast one day, 10 of the soldiers left and Elizabeth waved goodbye. They were unhappy to go, and every 2 steps they stopped and threw their kit bags in the air and waved wildly. And it took them 3 minutes to pick up all the bags, and she hoped that they could make it to the train in time. And Elizabeth said she remained in touch with many of them. She started to think about her confirmation coming up. She was being prepared by Mr. Tuke, the rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Forfar. Elizabeth started to think about her confirmation coming up. She was being prepared by Mr. Tuke, the rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Forfar. She was confirmed November the 5th, 1916. Instead of a private ceremony in the chapel at home, she insisted it be at St. John's in Forfar for soldiers and domestics there. Afterwards, Elizabeth and her mother went back south. February 1917, she had to be in bed for 10 days for bronchial complaint. May the 3rd, Lord Strathmore got a telegram stating that his son Michael was missing in northern France. He immediately telegraphed his daughter Rose in London that he was missing. They weren't saying he was killed or wounded at that time. Michael was adored in the family, and Elizabeth admired and loved her older brother. Michael's commanding officer, Colonel Stevenson, wrote to Lord Strathmore on the 20th of April. Michael had been leading his company in an attack at the village near Arras when they were heavily counterattacked. Some of the brigade's troops were captured, but Stevenson didn't know which battalion they belonged. May 8th, there were reports from German prisoners that a considerable number of British troops had been surrounded and captured at the village. They didn't know who they were, and they had to wait for the list from Germany. Elizabeth found the waiting difficult. She said, "Somehow I never thought anything could happen to Mike. Everybody's so fond of him, but one forgets that doesn't count in a war." Lady Strathmore was upset too. She had already lost one son in the war, and Patrick felt low too. David was the only one who remained optimistic. He was thought to have the power of second sight, and he visualized him in a house surrounded with fir trees, and his head was bandaged. May 22nd, the telephone rang at St. James Square. It was Cox's bank, saying that they had received a check drawn by Mike, and since he went missing, and they found out he was a prisoner of war. Elizabeth was so happy when she heard the news. A stream of friends and relations called the house to give their congratulations on Mike's survival. Elizabeth wrote to Burl as she lay in front of a fire drying her hair. She suggested they go to the theater to celebrate. Then they got a postcard from Mike dated the 4th of May, and it took over a month for them to get it. He wrote a postcard to let them know his address, and it's also the officer's prisoner of war camp at Karlsruhe. He wrote, "You can send me various things, chiefly food, but I want an auto-stroke razor and lots of blades, and most of all, did you get a letter from me? I got here last night after a long journey, and I arrived here with absolutely nothing except what I stand up in, and I'm getting the check cashed today. Nothing much to tell you of here, I'm afraid, but I hope I shall be able to write a letter shortly. Just going to have a bath. I'm perfectly filthy and a long beard. Love to all. Ideal milk, butter and bread and tea would be good. Also shirts, vests, drawers, socks, flannel, trousers, gray. Mike." Eventually, Elizabeth got a long letter from Mike, and he called her "my darling Buffy," and it was written from a prisoner of war camp in Stroheim, Hanover. He hoped that she had a good time dancing with Captain Phillips and could remember all the steps of the foxtrot. Food and drink, though, were his main interest, which is understandable. He asked for a weekly supply of flour, dripping, and baking powder to make scones, and also macaroni, Cadbury's peppermint creams, plain chocolate, and some cheap tobacco to roll his own cigarettes. He thought fondly of home, saying the strawberries must be ripe now. Mike got his first letters from May and Elizabeth by the end of June. He didn't get any parcels then, but by August the word went through, and he got 69 parcels. In September, he was moved to a better place, the New Brandenburg. There he was able to bathe in a lake every day and had a soft bed and a balcony. And later he was moved again to Schwalmnitz in Silesia. In 1917, Elizabeth returned to Glamis and found the new patients, 16 shy youngsters lying on the lawn. They saluted her, and she talked to some of them at once, but she was more self-conscious now that she was older. She told Burrell that they were mutually afraid of each other. The clerk at the Forfar school board had written to ask her to present medals and prizes at the school. Elizabeth was terrified, but her mother told her it was her duty. Elizabeth said, "I had to accept, and I know I shall die. It's too dreadful, and the worst of it is, I know sister and the boys will want to come. Oh, it's terrible." And she had nightmares about it. When Elizabeth got to know the new soldiers, she liked them just as she usually did. She said that just one of them was very good looking. She was more curious about people and met not only with convalescent soldiers, but officers from the dominions needed hospitality whose leave was on the front. Elizabeth was starting to distinguish between men. She said, "It's funny how dull some men are whilst others are so interesting." She said, "I shall be 17 soon. Damn, I don't want to get any older." In July, there was a terrible rain that flattened the crops at Glamis, and she was in bed for 2 weeks with severe influenza. The doctor was afraid that Elizabeth had got some kind of trench fever that could affect the heart. She was ordered to bed, and she wasn't steady on her feet, and she wasn't even allowed to walk or play tennis, as me heart is still weak. She was dosed with raw eggs and brandy and felt limp and tired. By October the 4th, she was getting better, and she was able to enjoy a concert thrown by the soldiers at Glamis for the benefit of their colleagues at Forfar Hospital. One day, Elizabeth went to see one of her favorite patients, Private C. Morris. His chest had been crushed on the battlefield, and he had been sent back to Glamis for more treatment. He said he was never treated better in any part of the British Empire than he was at Glamis Castle. He recovered, and the Strathmores offered him a job as a gardener at St. Paul's Walden. About this time, Elizabeth had her first proposal of marriage. It was from the New Zealander Lieutenant Parker. Men were starting to be fascinated by Elizabeth, and it was during this period she met the Prince of Wales. He was said to be the most glamorous man in London, and she danced with him twice. In 1918, the war came to an end. Elizabeth was at Glamis, and she remembered the patients at the castle, dressed in their hospital blues, marching together up the long avenue to the pub. In London, thousands of people rushed the street and danced around bonfires all over town. 750,000 people from the United Kingdom had been killed. Another 200,000 from the Empire also died. France lost many more. No one knows just how many people died around the world. Some say 10 million, others more. Russia lost 1,700,000 and 3 million dead and another 5 million wounded. Mike came home the first week of 1919. Elizabeth and her mother were at St. Paul's Walden's, and they got a telephone call to say he was on a train, and they rushed to London, and they had to wait as 5 trains unloaded wounded, sick, and disoriented soldiers. Elizabeth was shocked. Finally, Mike's train came, and they were able to hug him. 1919, a lot of Elizabeth's friends were engaged or getting married, but Elizabeth didn't have any desire to do that. She said, "I do hate weddings." The book stated that Elizabeth was a carefree girl in 1914 before the war began. After the war, she was a young woman, mature for her years. She was joyous, vivacious, and delightful company, but as a result of the war, she had moved along and learned about a wider circle of people than she would otherwise ever have met. She acquired through her experience of the suffering of friends and soldiers from all over the world an understanding of pain, the difficulties of others. It was also serve her and her country well in the years to come. So I will end the video here, and it's been very interesting to find out what happened during the war, and the good news that her brother Mike survived the war, and Elizabeth became an adult much quicker because of the war. In the next episode, we'll learn about her meeting with Prince Albert, who was to become her husband. It should be very interesting. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. And tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.